I was hanging out with a bunch of my friends over Thanksgiving break. We all go to different colleges, so this was one of the few times that we were actually able to get together. The group consisted of the usual suspects, which included Adam, Zach, Luke, Brandon, Mario, and myself. We always ended up at Mario's house and would tend to keep to the basement because of its size and seclusion from any unwanted attention. Mario's house is giant, and his basement is no exception. Apart from being very spacious, the basement is also nicely furnished, carpeted, and very comfortable to stay in. During most of our get-togethers, there's a fair amount of drinking, and after a while of being cooped up in the basement, my friends and I started to get rowdy and wanted to drive out to the local club. I'm not much of a drinker, so I usually stay pretty sober during these events. Thus, I'm usually left as the designated driver for everyone. Normally, I'm alright with driving everyone to the club, but during this specific night, I was really against going out. There were several reasons for this. 1. I would have to drive 5 drunkenly annoying people in my truck the day before Thanksgiving, which has the reputation of being the day with the most drunk drivers. I didn't want any of my friends to get an underage drinking violation, even though several of them already had one. I would also get into trouble if the police happened to find alcohol in my bloodstream, which they definitely would have. The second reason why I didn't want to go to the club because there was a high probability that one or several of my friends would end up in a fight. They tended to provoke people when they're drunk. This again leads to the police and underage drinking and all that damaging stuff. I really wanted to stay at Mario's and just hang out in the basement, but they were adamant about going out, and it was 5-1, so I finally caved in. And as the time came closer to leaving, my friends became more and more rambunctious. I had to go upstairs in order to retrieve my keys, so I left my loud friends roughhousing in the basement. I found my keys resting on a table in Mario's kitchen, but while I was walking over to get them, the lights went out. I stood still wondering what the hell just happened. But a few seconds later, the lights came back on. I didn't really think much about it, and went over to grab my keys off the table. That's when I noticed something else, and stopped moving. I couldn't hear the muffled noises that my friends were making below me anymore. I just shrugged it off, assuming that they had started to calm down, which was a good sign. I went back downstairs, but I was surprised to find that none of my friends were there anymore. The back door to the house was located in the basement, so I assumed that they had left through that, and were heading to the cars parked in the driveway. I quickly followed them through the back door, and started heading towards the driveway myself. I got to where the cars were parked, but once again my friends were nowhere to be found. Everyone drove up to Mario's house separately, and I got scared for a second, thinking they all piled into someone else's vehicle and took off intoxicated. But I counted the cars, and saw that all of them were still there. It was the middle of November, so it was cold as shit out, and I wanted to go back inside. But I decided to take a quick lap around the exterior of the house, just in case they were out there smoking or something. I walked around the entire house, but I didn't see or hear anything. So I went back inside through the back door. They still weren't in the basement, but they could have gone upstairs without me knowing. Since the basement is so big, there are 2 stairwells on either side of the room that were separated by a wall. I deduced that while I was coming down one of the stairwells, my friends had gone up the other one, probably looking for me. I went up to the first floor again, and looked around for my friends, but once again, I couldn't find anybody. There was no way they went up to the second floor. The last thing that Mario would want was to wake up his dad while he was drinking. I went up anyway, and looked around for my friends, trying to make as little noise as possible. I couldn't find them on the second floor. The only place left inside the house was the attic, but that was almost impossible for them to get into. They would need a chair just to reach the handle, and it was also locked from the outside. At this point, I was annoyed and confused. Where the hell did they go? I went back down to the basement and called Mario on my phone. It started to ring, but I could hear the on the coffee table next to me. Mario had left his phone. I tried calling Zach. It went straight to voicemail. I tried calling Luke. Same thing. Then Adam and Brandon. Every single one went straight to voicemail. I didn't know what to do at this point besides wait. I just sat there on the couch alone in the basement. I wasn't moving at all. I was just listening to nothing. It was really creepy in the basement all by myself. I don't want to come off as cliche by saying that it was almost too quiet, but that's exactly what it was. It's hard to describe the stillness that I was feeling. The best way I could put it was that I could literally hear the silence around me. I was starting to freak myself out and wanted to turn on the TV. I was about to stand up and get the remote when I heard something. It was very soft, but I knew I heard it. I stood still and let the silence consume me. After a few seconds, I heard the same thing again. It was still very soft, but I could tell what it was. It was snickering. The kind of snickering that you make whenever you try to suppress a laugh by putting your hand over your mouth. That's when it hit me. My friends were hiding somewhere and laughing at me. They obviously didn't want to be found, which is why they were trying to hold back their laughter. Once I figured out what the noise was, I became very annoyed. My friends were intentionally hiding from me even though I was getting genuinely worried about where they were. I got up and started looking around for them again, thoroughly checking all the closets in the basement. There were a lot of them. While I was looking, the snickering started to become more distinguished, but I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. I was at the end of the room, and I would hear the snickering behind me, but once I went over to the opposite end of the basement, I would hear it behind me again. As I mentioned before, the basement is a big area, with a lot of closets and closed rooms, but there are only so many places that a person can hide, and I felt like I checked all of them. Yet the damn snickering was still going on, and it was very noticeable at this point. Then, all at once, it stopped. It cut off out of nowhere, and the lights went out once again. There was no way that my friends could choreograph a stunt like this, especially while they had been drinking. Something was wrong. Something felt off, and it was at that exact moment I started to become scared. Standing in the middle of the dark basement, not moving, I was once again in complete and utter silence. It felt like I was in a nightmare and wanted to wake up more than anything. Instead, I just stood there, too petrified to move. That's when I could hear footsteps. The floor was carpeted, so they were quiet, but I could hear them clear as day. They were coming from my right, but they weren't the type of footsteps that you would expect. These were very particular. They were taken slowly, carefully. Each step was followed by a few seconds of silence, as if whatever was walking did not want to be heard. Something was creeping closer to me. I dared not move my body, but I searched frantically with my eyes, trying to see what was approaching. It was still pitch black, but I could swear I could make out a figure advancing towards me from the right. I closed my eyes and started to cry. I couldn't help it. Warm tears slid down my cheeks as I braced myself for the worst. Then the lights came back on, and I almost screamed. I looked around, but there was no one in the basement with me. The snickering was gone, and I felt lightheaded from the amount of terror that was flowing through me. I was horrified, and I didn't want to be in that room by myself any longer. I still had no idea where my friends were, and as much as I wanted to leave, I still didn't want to leave them behind. If this was some kind of elaborate prank that my friends were trying to scare me with, it worked. But the joke was over, and they would have to come out of hiding by now. I texted each of my friends saying that I was going to leave if they didn't come out. I tried calling each of them 3 times, but like before, they all went straight to voicemail, except for Mario's, which was still buzzing on the coffee table. I told myself that I would give them 5 more minutes to respond, and then I was out of there. 5 minutes passed, and I was leaving through the back door and heading towards my truck. It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning at this point. I was tired, scared, and annoyed. I honestly didn't know what to make of the situation. Once I got home, I started to realize how stupid I was for thinking that there was some monster in the basement with me. I knew my friends were just trying to scare me for whatever reason, and I'm sure that I gave them the exact reaction that they were looking for, me crying by myself in the dark. They probably had it on video too, and were going to post it on every single media platform they could. I no longer felt bad for leaving them behind. As a matter of fact, I felt betrayed by them. I spent over an hour worrying about where my friends had disappeared to, and tried looking for them, and in return they scared the living shit out of me, and made me feel like I'm an idiot. I went to bed, and waited anxiously for the morning to come, so I could give my friends hell for what they did. When I woke up the next morning, I immediately went for my phone, and was shocked to find that Mario had sent me a text around 3:30 a.m. I opened the text to find nothing but gibberish. It clearly looked like a drunk text. I really wasn't surprised by this. Mario had sent me many drunk texts before. It was almost 11 a.m., and if the guys had stayed up all night drinking, there was no way that any of them were awake yet. I decided to wait it out and make them call me first. It wasn't too long after I woke up that I received another message. This time it was from Mario's dad. "Did you guys go somewhere? I can't seem to find anybody. I actually left last night. I don't know if they went somewhere, but I couldn't find them either. Have you tried calling or texting any of them? I keep getting their voicemail." "Yeah, I'm getting the same thing." "Alright, well if Mario or anybody else calls, you tell them to call me so I know where they are." "Will do." About 2 hours later, Mario's dad texted me again. "Hey, have you heard anything from your friends yet? Mario and I were supposed to go somewhere today, but he still isn't answering his phone." "No, sorry. I haven't heard anything from them yet." I still hadn't told them about the drunken text, because Mario's dad hates it whenever Mario and his friends come over to drink. Around 4 p.m., Mario's dad messages me once again. "Have you heard anything yet? I'm starting to get worried. All the other parents are starting to call me asking me where everyone is. I've tried calling Mario and everyone else over and over again, but none of them are answering." "I still haven't heard anything, but I'll try calling them myself. Don't worry, I'm sure they're fine. They probably stayed up all night over someone else's house, and have been sleeping in all day." "Okay, just please tell me if you hear anything." I started texting and calling my friends again, but I still wasn't getting anything. Another 3 hours go by. It's a little past 7 at this point. I was starting to get very worried, but I didn't realize how serious the situation was until I got a knock on the door. It was the police. They informed me that Mario's dad and several of the other parents reported their sons missing. I was driven back to Mario's house and was greeted by several other police officers, as well as all of my friends' worried parents. The parents kept asking me questions about what we were doing last night and where their children had gone, but I honestly didn't know. I just kept reassuring them that everybody was alright, but after a while, even I was starting to doubt myself. 2 police officers, one skinny and one fat, escorted me into the basement. They kept asking me questions, and I answered as best as I could, but I was starting to become delirious from everything that was happening. I told them the whole story, starting from when I went upstairs to get my car keys. I told them about the snickering, and how the lights went out. I told them about the figure I saw creeping towards me in the dark. At this point, I didn't care how crazy it sounded. I just wanted my friends to be okay. I told them about the drunken text I got last night, and when I showed them the message, the fat cop took my phone and walked away with it. I was left with the skinny police officer, who continued to ask me questions. I asked him if Mario's dad had found his phone on the coffee table. The officer told me that Mario's dad found no such thing. I informed the officer that I distinctly remembered seeing Mario's phone on the coffee table, and had assumed that he retrieved it later, which would explain the drunken text I got from him last night. He wrote down a couple more notes, and left, telling me to stay where I was. I was back in the basement, standing almost exactly where I was when the lights went out. The scene now, compared to last night, was completely different. There were detectives everywhere looking over everything, dusting for fingerprints and asking questions. I closed my eyes and zoned out for a while. I was sucked back into reality when the fat officer yelled for me to come over. He was standing next to some geeky-looking guy wearing glasses. Once I got over to them, the fat cop asked me if I was playing some kind of sick joke. Stunned, I asked him what he was talking about. The guy with the glasses was the first to answer. He informed me that the text that Mario had sent me last night was not gibberish. It was Latin, and translated to,
After I finished college, I moved out of my parents' house. I wanted a new life, sort of fresh and far away from my hometown. It's not like I hated my parents or couldn't stand them in any way. They were great and supportive. I just wanted to escape this hole I was living in and finally taste the adult life. There was really nothing to do here, and I wanted to try life in a big city. Unfortunately, after a month, I was already running out of money. I couldn't find a job in my industry, so I had to settle for anything that could pay my rent for the next month. The closest job to me was at a Dunkin' Donuts. I applied for this job and I was immediately hired. The first few weeks were hard, but later I actually enjoyed working there. I met some awesome people. One of them was Nina. We were getting along so well that we requested our supervisor to always sign us both in on the same shift. It was never that busy there, so we spent most of our time talking and gossiping. She was a really happy person, and I was in a similar position in life as me. Her parents kicked her out of the house when she was 18, but she had to work hard to finish her education and pay rent. I always supported her, and she gave me as much as she could back. We really became best friends. And that's how my life was. I was working at Dunkin' for about half a year now, and things were going great until a really strange man appeared into my life. He would always visit us on Friday evenings, and this consistency only added to the creepiness of his behavior. He used to order a cappuccino with 1 chocolate ring donut every single time. He was always wearing the same clothes, which was really weird and gross. It was a hideous green jacket with brown stains and dirty, roughed-up blue trousers. After making an order, he would always sit in the same exact table and would stare at me and Nina intensely. Of course, this never really bothered me at first. I considered myself a pretty decent-looking girl and have had a man's eye in my body here and there. But the way this man was staring at me, there was something disgusting about it. It made me sick to my stomach. I think it was more uncomfortable for Nina than me. She got really scared of him and told me she was afraid of him. But one day, he stayed longer than usual. It was almost closing hour and there were no more other customers. It was raining outside and Nina and I were sitting behind the counter and talking as usual. I was getting really annoyed because I knew I was the one with the key. I had to close the door. It was my closing shift and I would inevitably have to be the one to ask him to leave. Our manager had already left the building by now and it was just Nina, the man, and I. But right as I was going to go up to him and ask him to leave, he stood up and came to the counter. "How can I help you? Do you want anything else?" I asked. "I'm not hungry," he said, and there was a really long, awkward silence. I didn't really know what to say, so I just stared at the floor and waited for him to say something. "But I'm horny," he said, laughing. At that point, I was so anxious and embarrassed. I didn't even say anything back because I was just so confused and taken aback. "Come on, I was joking," the man said. "I've been visiting this place from time to time and I noticed a really pretty lady here. I'd love to get to know her closer, if you know what I mean." He laughed awkwardly. Nina and I looked at each other with wide eyes. I turned my head back to the man and told him, "Sorry, but I'm seeing someone." "I'm not talking about you," the man said, "but your friend over there. Can you ask her for her number?" He then started to stare at Nina, eyes and mouth wide open. It took me a second or two to realize, but I noticed his arm was shuffling around. I looked closer and his hand was in his pants. This sick bastard was masturbating as he was talking to us. "You better leave right now, or I'm calling the police," I screamed. Nina was about to cry, but I stayed strong and tried to protect her. He tried to jump over the counter and grab Nina, but thankfully I knocked him over the edge and he landed on his head. We ran. We ran as fast as we could. We never looked back. When we got to safety, We called our manager, who called the police. The cops were quick in telling us that the man had gotten away, and they closed the case shortly after because there was really nothing they could do. As disappointing as this was, Nina and I were just happy that the man was off our backs. It seemed like things would go back to normal. A few days passed by and I almost forgot about him. Everything seemed to be back to normal and I enjoyed working with my best friend as a barista. Eventually, Nina and I had another closing shift. The day was ending and we were cleaning up the tables and preparing the building to get locked up. Nina eventually left for her usual smoke break. She left her stuff inside and went out through the back door, popped open a cigarette. After about half an hour, I realized that Nina still wasn't back in the store. This was odd. It would usually take Nina only about 10 minutes to take a cigarette break, and she'd never just leave work like this, not with her stuff left behind anyways. It made no sense. Her phone and her wallet were still in the store. I then remembered the man, and my heart and mind started to race. I instantly started worrying for the worst. I looked in the back of the store and she wasn't there. I looked in the back patio and there was no sign of her. Just a still-lit cigarette lying on the ground. I called my manager and he called the police. We searched all night for her, looked up and down and couldn't seem to find her. It made no sense. Even the police were stumped. It's like she disappeared into thin air. That night, I could barely sleep. I knew the police were handling it, but I just wanted to know where she was. How could she disappear like this? A few grim and horrible days went by, and I got the news, but it wasn't the news I wanted. Nina was found dead in the woods, her body stripped half naked. She was violated and murdered, and we all knew who the culprit was. The police found the man not far away from the crime scene. He was staying in an old, dingy trailer. The man got life in prison, but this wouldn't fix the years of PTSD and mental health issues I'd have following this. I soon quit my job at Dunkin'. It was the right thing to do. I couldn't work there. Not after what happened to Nina.
Delivery driver at my local Pizza Hut when I was a sophomore in college. It wasn't the best paying job, but it was enough to where I could pay bills and other things I wanted. Being a full-time student, I had a flexible work schedule, meaning I'd only work a few times per week. My typical hours were the weekends, which were the busiest days, seeing as there were more customers. This incident happened on a Friday night while I was out doing deliveries. For context, I live in a small town of Tennessee, so there would be a lot of land around the area and nobody out on the road. The delivery I had gotten was located on the other side of town, where the more wealthier people resided. This was a plus, as the wealthier people tend to tip more and were generally a lot nicer than most people. I was on a long road with forests on both sides trying to get to the destination when, out of nowhere, I see a car tailing behind me. This wasn't common as these roads are mostly quiet during this time of night. For some reason, I had this feeling of dread inside and figured this person was up to no good. All the while, the car's horn is blaring nonstop to the point where I was trying to figure out what they wanted. All of a sudden, I hear the voice of a man from the car say something, but because of the wind, I couldn't hear him. That's when I slowed down where he yelled again, and that was when I could hear something along the lines of, "Your car's on fire." I look in my rearview mirror, and the trunk is full on smoking with small flames coming from my wheels. How I didn't see this, I have no idea, but I start screaming and pull over while running out of the car. Thankfully, the driver of the other car got out and made sure I was okay. Suddenly, a loud boom can be heard from the car, and half of the car is now in flames. Now this is the part where I could only describe to be the work of God. Turns out, this driver wasn't even supposed to be on this road. He had been coming home from work when, for whatever reason, he got this urge to turn onto the street even though it was the wrong way. The feeling was so strong that he thought he was crazy, but decided to finally do it, and that's when he saw me. When he said that, I stood there in utter shock. It took a while, but fire rescue came to put it out while I informed my boss. Unfortunately, the fire department couldn't figure out as to what caused the fire. I had taken a week off from work after that, and all delivery vehicles were inspected. Till this day, I thank that driver for getting me to notice, as I thought he didn't have good intentions. If there hadn't been someone on that road that night, God only knows what would have happened to me. Thank God for that driver, and thank God I finally noticed.
I used to go to Starbucks all the time. I would say at least 2 or 3 times a week I would stop at Starbucks for coffee on my way to work. I would order online every time as I left my house, and then pick it up on my way. I got it so often that some of the employees started to recognize me, and I would be friendly with a few of them. Sadly though, the lines at the location I usually went to were always super long, and one day I realized another Starbucks that was also on my way to work. I made the choice to switch locations to see if it would be faster, and it was in fact quite a bit faster every single day, and it saved me some time. After I would say about a couple of weeks of going to the new location, one day I forgot to place my order online. It wasn't a big deal, but I would just have to order at the drive-thru at the Starbucks. When I got there, the voice on the other end of the speaker of the drive-thru said hi to me and called me by my name. This surprised me because I had only been to that location 3 or 4 times at that point, and it wasn't a daily basis or anything. I also didn't recognize the voice as it was a man's voice, and all the people I knew from the previous location were females. I pulled up to the next window after I ordered, and a man with a headset came to the window. I paid and he handed me my coffee and smiled. He once again said my name and told me to have a nice day, then he winked at me. The man was rather tall and had sort of long dark hair with a slight beard. I have to say I had never seen him before, but beyond that I really didn't think anything of it. It wasn't until every single time that I would go to Starbucks after that, he would be working and would always be the one to hand me my order. Each time he would wink at me or have an almost creepy grin on his face. None of this really bothered me though, but it did feel a little bit strange. Then I stopped seeing the man. There were different people every time when I got my coffee in the morning, and I didn't really notice the fact that I wasn't seeing this strange guy anymore. One of the times I went inside to pick up my coffee and was walking back to my car when suddenly I saw the man again. He was in the parking lot and he approached me as I was getting into my car. I didn't really recognize him at first. It took me a few seconds. He said hi to me and smiled and asked me how I was doing. I said fine in a confused tone and asked what he wanted. He then asked me how the movie I watched last night was. Then he winked at me like the past times and walked away. I stood there next to my car in shock. I had in fact been watching a movie the previous night, but I had no idea how he knew about it. I was really creeped out, and for me, this was the last straw with the man from being slightly weird to completely creepy. I had no idea who this guy was other than the fact that he worked at the Starbucks and was creepy. I decided to go back inside the Starbucks and ask another employee who he was. I first looked around the parking lot, but the man was gone. I then walked inside the Starbucks, which was relatively busy, but nothing too crazy. I went to the counter and asked who the man was with longer brown hair, a slight beard, and pretty tall. I was told in response that it sounded a lot like a guy named Jonathan, who had worked there but had been fired for inappropriate behavior around the workplace. They said he had worked at another location close by, but had moved to that location shortly before getting fired. I briefly told my story. I was told by several people that they thought he seemed creepy and had apparently followed one of his coworkers home one night. It gave me the chills as I realized this Jonathan guy most likely was outside of my house the previous night and saw me watching a movie. So many thoughts started to race through my head, such as how did he know where I lived, and had he followed me home or been to my house before? I had to go to work at that point, so I left, but throughout the day I texted with several of my friends about what had happened. Later that day I got home from work and asked my friend Lisa to come over and keep me company. I got home and shortly after heard the sound of Lisa pulling up. I was so relieved because I really didn't want to be alone in my house that night after what had happened. But then I received a text from Lisa saying that she would be there in about 15 minutes. I went over to look out the window and noticed a different car driving slowly down the street outside my window. I lived in a quiet neighborhood and there wasn't a whole lot of cars that went down the street, so I sort of noticed when they did. It was a black car and the windows were tinted. It parked across the street, but slightly past my house. Of course, I was paranoid and worried that it was the Jonathan guy. I watched the car from my window, hoping to see anybody get out of the car that wasn't Jonathan from Starbucks. But nobody was getting out. Then my phone started to vibrate and ring in my left hand as I held the living room curtain open with my right. It just about gave me a heart attack, and I closed the curtain and looked at who was calling me. It was a number that I didn't recognize. I decided to answer it. The voice on the other end was the familiar voice of Jonathan. I heard him ask me why I was watching him and told me to come outside. I freaked out at this and screamed as loud as I could that I was calling the police. He then hung up on me, and I opened the curtain slightly to see his car pulling away. I then called the police, and they said they would be on their way. They arrived a short time later along with Lisa. I gave them as much information as I could on Jonathan, and I stayed at Lisa's house the next few nights. Finally, I was told that Jonathan had been found, and I would no longer have to worry about him anymore. He had worked at the first Starbucks I had been to almost every day, and apparently asked to transfer when he realized I had gone to another one. I just wonder how long he knew where I lived, or how many times he had been to my house without me noticing. Last year, I went to Starbucks for some coffee. I don't get Starbucks all that often, but I do from time to time. On this particular day, I was pretty sleepy but had to drive about an hour home, so I went for some coffee. It wasn't all that busy there, but there were a few other cars in the drive-thru ahead of me. I pulled in and waited. Eventually it was my turn, and I ordered. When I got to the window to pay, I was told that my order had been paid for by the person in front of me. I wasn't asked if I wanted to keep it going and pay for the next person, but was just handed my coffee. I was pretty happy about it until I drove away and noticed that within the little cardboard thing that goes around the cup, there was a piece of paper rolled up into a note. Obviously I was driving, so I didn't bother reading the note, but once I got home almost an hour later, I read it. It was a small piece of paper which gave details about me and my family, such as names, addresses, and phone numbers. I was told that I needed to come up with $10,000 or something very bad would happen. I couldn't believe what I was reading or how this happened. I had never been to that Starbucks location before and didn't even remember what car had been in front of me to pay for my drink or anything like that. But I was terrified, so I went straight to the police. When I did, I was told they would investigate, and they told me a short time later that they didn't believe I had anything to really worry about. Still, I did worry about it, and I never did consider giving whoever it was the money. I didn't even know how to contact them. It's been a while since that happened now, and I guess maybe it was a joke or something, but I still don't know how to explain any of that, like how the person got my information, or why they chose me in the drive-thru that day.
I've been a big fan of this channel for a long time. I had never had a story that made me think that it was worth sharing until recently. This is my first time posting something like this, but I felt like I should since it is something that will most likely stick with me forever. For context, I'm a male and I work at a gas station in the deep south, a part of Louisiana that most people have never even heard of. I'm talking about dirt roads with no name, thick trees that seem to swallow darkness, and you might be lucky enough to see a streetlight every other mile. The little gas station that I work at is located in the trifecta of all these elements. I, of course, work the overnight shifts. The gas station doesn't see much excitement. There are either the 10 customers that come in between the hours of 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., or the random possums that decide to make the trash cans outside their personal drum set, but I digress. The night started like any other night. Make sure that the coffee is fresh, check. Make sure all the snacks, cold drinks, and beer are properly stocked, check. And now all that is left for me to do is, well, wait. I stood behind the counter, looking at inventory, listening to music, and just pacing around for the first couple of hours. You know the thing that people say, time flies? Yeah, that didn't apply to that shift. As I got bored, I decided to leave the register and check out the items on the shelf to, make sure nothing majestically sold itself. While I was on one of the aisles, I heard a man call out, "Hey, y'all open?" I turned around to see that I had 2 customers standing at the checkout. Now, I should mention this gas station does not have that fancy system that makes the doors go ding when someone comes in. Top-line security, right? So I was caught off guard that 2 customers had come in without my knowledge. I quickly walked up to the register and apologized for the wait. As we were making the usual conversation of, "Hey, how you doing?" and "Man, it's dark out here in this area," the customer asked another question that is usually always asked. "How long is it until I get to the city from here?" I answered it with the same answer that seems to automatically live in my mind rent-free. It's a good couple hours from here, just go towards the lights." Corny, I know, but that's my thing. Anyway, after scanning the customer's items, which literally was a candy bar and a bottle of water, I told them, "Hey, be careful out there, y'all. There's a tornado warning in this area until 7 a.m., and the rain's picking up." In this area, even on a clear night, it's hard to see what is ahead of you on these dark, desolate roads. As I went to look at the second customer, I realized there was no second customer anymore. I chalked it up to the guy not wanting to wait any longer and decided to just leave. I mean, from what I saw, he didn't have any items with him and probably only needed some cigarettes or something that was behind the counter. I told my customer farewell and was ready to grind out the rest of these hours, but just like a psychic, my own words had foreshadowed my fate for the night. Not long after the customer left, it might have been an hour or so, the sky could no longer hold its sorrow and just wept gallons of tears from above. To me, this is not a big deal. Bad weather, rain, and possums, yeah, I still have it out for them, happen a lot in my area. So much so that I call the experience HWA, which stands for humid, wet, and annoying. As the rain and wind picked up, I started to feel a little uneasy. Mostly because, honestly, I would rather be at my house when the rain and wind decided to battle for dominance. With that being said, the inevitable happened. The power lines were no match for the relentless punishment from the elements, and then darkness, silence, aggravation. The power had gone out, and there was no backup generator for me. I was just there, standing in a blanket of darkness so thick that it seemed to cover everything in its embrace. I called my manager to let him know that the power had gone out and asked him what I should do right now. Of course, with it being so late/early, whatever 4 a.m. means to you, there was no response. I thought about locking up and just buckling down at the gas station until the storm passed. After all, I was getting paid. But that's when I heard it. Between the thunder, between the rain, between the wind, I heard a slight crunch coming from one of the aisles further away from the entrance of the station. At first, I paid no mind to the sound. I believed it to just be store items shifting with all of the terrible weather. Darkness had a way of bending your mind, making you see and hear things that your mind usually dismisses as just the wind. But after sitting there for a while, upset of course, but getting paid, I called my manager again, but unfortunately no answer. Then, right after the light of my phone faded and my eyes were trying to adjust to the darkness, I heard it again. Movement. Movement, but this time closer, and right in between my phone call and a thunderstrike. Like I said, I have listened to this channel for years, so now I'm on high alert. Someone was in here. I was not alone. I just knew it. I tried to calm my nerves, not wanting to be that guy who overreacts, but I asked myself, can you ever really be too safe? I made a potentially dangerous and thoughtless move. I stood up and yelled, "Is anybody still in here?" I got no response, but that didn't mean that there was no one there. The air felt thick from humidity. Not just that, though. That feeling you get when you're not alone. The feeling of being watched, as cliché as it sounds. I remembered something that I knew all along. There is no ding on the door to let me know when customers enter or exit. That and the thought of that second customer came to mind. I never saw him leave. I just knew that he was there and then gone. Automatically, without a doubt, felt that something was strange, something was not right. So I did what any gas station worker would do in the pitch black. Pretended to be a ninja so that I could slowly make my way to the source of the noise without being caught. As it turns out, I'm not a ninja. The moment I stepped from behind the counter that I had been sitting behind, a voice stopped me in my tracks. "Give me what you got," was all that the void softly spoke to me. I froze, scared, too scared to say a word or move an inch. When I called out, I wasn't truly expecting a response. Soon I heard footsteps, slow but getting closer. My mind yelled, "Do something, run, charge at the sound and hope for the best." After all of that, though, I did nothing. Then his face appeared. A face that I wouldn't have seen if my manager hadn't called me back at that moment, allowing my phone to light up. The second customer. As it turns out, he never left. I pretended not to see or know that I recognized him, and again he repeated, "Come on, give me what you got, now." Still in a calm and calculating way. I spoke for the first time after noticing that I was holding my breath the whole time. "All I have is $250 in the register." He was quiet for a while, but then told me, "Give it over." I wish that I could say that I pulled out some special move that brought the guy down, allowing me to hold him until the police showed up. But this is real life. I gave him the money, and luckily for me, he accepted it. He knew that the police would not be here in these parts at this time, and with this weather, and even if called, it would take at least 30 minutes to get there. A local, I assumed. It had to be so confident. I talked to the manager and the police after all was said and done. My manager apologized that I had to go through that and also apologized for not answering sooner. I told him no worries, everyone deserves sleep. I got to leave early, and the manager closed the store for a couple of hours until the next employees came in. I was so lost in a trance after that situation that I truly believed that it still couldn't be real. That couldn't have just happened to me after a couple of years of working there. And that was that, I thought. A funny plot twist. 2 weeks later, a man was caught trying to hold up a gas station close to where my job was located. A man that I remembered from that flash of light on my phone. The only difference is, he didn't get away this time. The thing that I can really say that I've learned from all of this is, no matter how comfortable, or how much you think you know how each day will play out, always, always be on guard.
When I turned 26, my friends and I decided to rent a small lakeside cabin that we found on Airbnb to have some fun on the lake for my birthday. It was a really cool idea, and I'll never forget my friends for being kind enough to do that for me. I mean, it wasn't the best birthday I ever had, but they couldn't have accounted for what was going to happen. You see, we got to the cabin on Thursday at around 4 p.m., so there was still enough time to swim for a bit before it got dark. As soon as we realized that, we all just ran inside, tossed our stuff on the beds, and then got ready to hit the lake. We swam for about an hour before deciding to call it a night and relax with some food and a fire. I brought my guitar, and we all had a good time before we ended up getting tired. But eventually, it was time to put out the fire and go to bed. We all went inside and hung out for another couple of minutes before splitting into the 2 rooms and hitting the hay. The bed wasn't too comfortable, but after swimming and eating way too much junk, I ended up passing out without any problems. Now normally, I'm a really heavy sleeper. The only thing that wakes me up is when something makes me move or touches my face. And I remember being woken up by the feeling of something tickling my nose, which caused me to swat whatever it was away and roll over to my side, which was when I heard a strange, whispering sort of noise. I couldn't tell what it was, but I was far too tired. So assuming it was just my buddies messing with me, I said, "Cut it out. I'm trying to sleep." That was when I heard the noise again. So this time I sat up and turned to yell at the guys who I thought were messing with me. But to my surprise, no one was there. And Kyle, my friend who I was sharing the room with, he was still knocked out. I shook my head and figured that I must have felt a fly or something land on my face before deciding to lie back down. As I closed my eyes, I could tell that I was going to be asleep in no time. But before I could get there, the noise was back. I couldn't make it out, but I swear it was like a whisper or someone snickering. Only this time, the sound was coming from the foot of my bed. I wasn't messing around anymore, and this time I sprang from my bed ready to confront whoever was messing with me. But again, there was nothing there. But as I looked back toward the bed, I realized what I had been hearing. It wasn't whispering at all. Instead, it was the quiet hissing of a snake that had somehow made its way into my bed. I freaked out and woke up Kyle, who responded the same. We woke up the other two guys who were with us to check the whole cabin to see if there were any other animal intruders, as we also figured out how to remove the snake from my bed. None of us could tell if it was venomous or not, but eventually, we figured out how to get it into a pillowcase and brought it out of the woods before letting it go. I didn't get any sleep the entire 3 days that we were at the cabin. There was no way, not after a snake woke me up by touching my face. It's definitely a birthday I'll never forget. I was only 10 the last time that my family had gone to our cabin for a vacation. We used to go every year, but after that time, we stopped, which I was glad about because something really strange happened the last time I was there. It was me, my older sister, my mother, and my father. They had all gone to sleep and I was restless. I mean, it was early and I was 10, so I didn't know what to do with myself. I ended up making the foolish decision to sneak out and stare at the stars. We didn't get those kinds of sights in the city, so I snuck out of the cabin as quietly as I could and made my way to the fire pit. The fire had long been put out, but it was a good place to sit and overlook the field near the cabin and see the stars. As I sat there, I looked out into the field, and at first, I couldn't tell what I was seeing. It looked like something was moving in the tree line just beyond the field. It wasn't until it stepped out into the light that I realized it was a man, and he appeared to be heading towards the woods on the other side of the field. As he made his way through the field, I could see more and more of what he was doing because of the moonlight. I noticed he was dragging something that looked heavy. My heart just about to stop, though when I noticed he stopped moving and turned in my direction, I wasn't sure that he saw me until I noticed he lifted his hand, and I swear he waved. I was so scared, however, to my relief, he just kept on moving. I immediately went inside and didn't say anything about it to my parents. I didn't want to get in trouble for sneaking out. It wasn't until 5 years later, when we were all sitting outside of our home, enjoying some takeout by the pool, that I ended up bringing it up. I didn't think anything of it. We had just been talking about some scary things that happened to us, so I thought it would be a good one to share, but the look on my dad's face told me that I had said something that really freaked him out. That was when he explained to me why we have never gone back to that cabin. Apparently, 2 weeks after we had left and gone home, my parents were questioned by the police considering a body that they found near our cabin just a few days after we had left. Apparently, upon searching the area, police found 9 different bodies buried in the property. I will absolutely never forget what I saw that night, or how lucky I am still to be here.
This happened during my freshman year of high school. Winter had just ended, so the air at night felt really cool, but not too cold. My old best friend, who we'll call Veronica, had texted me asking what I was up to, and she said she was hungry, to which I replied, me too. In order to better understand the story, I should explain the layout and distances from each location. I was at my cousin's house, which was about 8 blocks away from Veronica's, and McDonald's was probably about a half a mile away from both of our homes. Across the street from our McDonald's was a Target and various other fast food chains, and maybe about a mile and a half away was a Burger King. I don't exactly remember whose genius idea it was to sneak out at 11 o'clock at night in order to satisfy our hunger, but nonetheless we did. Although I had never done it before, sneaking out was relatively easy for me. As for Veronica, well, let's just say she wasn't new to it. Because I was late, I was in my PJs, which consisted of shorts and an oversized football jersey. In retrospect, probably not the best clothing idea for 11 p.m. while sneaking out in a not-so-safe city, but I digress. We met up halfway and made our way to McDonald's, catching up about whatever boy problems and idiotic math teacher we had at the time. The streets weren't desolate, but not necessarily buzzing with cars either. I remember being worried that my mom would see me walking around at 11 p.m. if she drove by. We decided to cut through Target's huge parking lot to save some distance and time. Now, the McDonald's and Target were a bit uphill, but only if you walked from west to east. We came from south to north, so it wasn't really a problem for us. Not that it would have been either way, but it's better to explain. As we were crossing the street from Target to McDonald's, we saw a guy, probably about 5'5", so he was pretty short. He was wearing a blue hoodie and I believe some shorts. Veronica was maybe about 5'2" at the time, where I was about 5'3" to 5'4". Because all this happened years ago, some of the details are a little fuzzy. I didn't really think too much of the guy because Veronica and I were laughing away and talking about anything and everything, but I did take a mental note of him. So, being the geniuses that we were, neither of us actually checked to see if the McDonald's would be open. Well, to be correct, it was open, but just the drive-thru. Yeah, we failed to do one simple yet very important necessity. No problem for us geniuses, though. Why, you may ask? Because Burger King wasn't that far away, and we really needed to satisfy our hunger, so why not? We started making our way west, going downhill. I was ranting away while Veronica kept glancing over her shoulder. She has this habit of doing this every time we walk anywhere, no matter the time of day. She then linked her arm around mine, and then softly said to me, "That guy is following us." I glanced behind, not making it obvious, but just to see if she was messing with me. Yeah, we kind of had a messed up sense of humor, so it wouldn't have been that much of a stretch. Unfortunately, she was telling the truth. She started to walk faster now, to which I tightened my grip around her arm and told her not to walk so fast, or he would know we were on to him. As I mentioned previously, our city wasn't really one of the safest, so I grew up being taught to always be aware of my surroundings. I wasn't as street smart as my siblings, as I was more book smart than anything, but I wasn't a blithering idiot either. I then told Veronica that we should just go across the street and enter Target. As we crossed the street, I glanced behind us and I noticed that he was crossing too. At this point, Veronica was getting extremely worried. And me, you might ask? I was laughing. For some reason I found this to be funny because what are the odds that the first time I ever sneak out, I'd end up being followed from a McDonald's? Suffice to say though, I ended up sneaking out again after that. What can I say? I wanted to get the whole high school experience. As we made our way through the large Target parking lot, I FaceTimed my cousin to share what was currently happening, as she knew I snuck out. While I was laughing and explaining, Veronica was pretty much in full-on panic mode. Eventually I hung up abruptly as Veronica and I decided to run through the rest of the parking lot and right into Target's doors. The guy, still following us. As we made it inside the Target, we decided to walk around just in case he followed us inside, but luckily he didn't. We made our way back to the glass windows where the entrance was located at, and then we sat down to really grasp the whole situation. Veronica said she saw the guy walk past Target in the same direction we had originally came from. Behind Target is a park, which I always walk past in order to get home. I decided to call my older brother and asked what to do. He told me to call my cousin and then tell her to walk and then meet us at Target. I texted her instead, and I told her to bring her giant of a boyfriend who happened to be spending the night. She said that she would meet us by the front. Veronica was really relieved, but I still didn't really care about it at all. A few minutes pass, and a guy walks in Target and makes his way over to Veronica and me. I don't remember exactly, but I think he was Caucasian and maybe about 5'7". He explained that he was in the McDonald's drive-thru when he noticed us walk away, and the guy following from behind. He said that he saw us cross over into Target, as well as the guy, and that he wanted to make sure we were safe. We explained our side of the story and then reassured him that we were in fact okay. He told us we shouldn't be out this late and that we should really call our family to pick us up. We said that we had family on the way and then thanked him for looking out for us, to which he told us to stay safe. I think hearing him witness the whole thing really made it feel real to me, because that's kind of when reality hit me. My cousin ended up coming with her boyfriend and dad in the car, so yeah, we got busted. But I didn't get in trouble because, well, they were my cousins and I was kind of a goody two-shoes. Not to mention the fact that my mom probably would have been really mad at my cousins for not noticing I snuck out under their supervision. Veronica came to my cousin's house with me, where we just talked about what happened. I even FaceTimed one of our senior friends and told him about it too. Veronica and I no longer talk due to other reasons that didn't happen until years later. But during the rest of our friendship, we'd always recount that story and laugh about it. But it really is scary how easily something bad could have happened if we had only continued our journey to Burger King. And the realization that another person witnessed it made it all too real for me. I've been followed a few more times after this event, and it's really given me some extreme anxiety. I think it's pretty damn safe to say that I won't be walking alone anymore. Hell no. For a little backstory, this all took place when COVID-19 had shut everything down in March 2020. I was sent home from my college and I had to do with Zoom classes, and I also went back to work at the burger joint that I would work at whenever I was home on breaks. I won't say the name of the place, but it was always very busy, and during COVID it made us even busier due to us being a fast food place, so we never had to close down, but other places in the plaza did. We always had some really crazy and nasty people, but the pandemic just made everyone so much worse. At the time, we had this one regular that would come in who we thought had some mental problems multiple times a week. He would be really emotionless in his talking and just gave really blank dead stares towards everyone, and just stood there like a gargoyle, really intimidating and statuesque. He would ride his bike up to the walk-up area and look through the sliding windows until one of us got to taking his order. But he only really liked certain people to take his order and was also very cold towards us. He would order the same thing every time, but wants it fresh right out of the grease and handled by once again only certain people. And to make sure of it, he'll intensely stare at us through the pickup window. He would make the other customers outside so uncomfortable that they would walk away or they would just sit in their cars until he left. He used to only come in during the day shifts, but because days were much busier than the night shifts, and with all his demands that he would give us every time, my manager got fed up and told him to no longer come here during the day, thus now making him a night shift problem. During the week, I would work night shifts because of class, and I would usually be clocking out by 10 p.m. It was around 9:30 and I was closing my side down and starting to clean when he then rolled up on his bike. I happened to be one of the few people he let take his order, so as usual I took his order. He wants everything completely fresh, the standard list of demands. But one demand he gave was new. He always orders a side of fries with his meal, and sometimes to put the fries in the carton we either use a scooper or tongs. He asked us to use the scooper instead of the tongs because it'll give him more fries. Me just wanting him to leave and being close to leaving myself, I just went over and told the fry guy what he wanted. The fry guy just rolled his eyes, knowing how annoying this guy is, and dropped some new fries in the grease for him. The fry guy went on a break shortly after, and the night manager took over a station and waited for the fries to be ready. She didn't know it was this guy though, and she used the tongs to put the fries in the carton. She then hands me the order to pass out. The guy slides open the window, and he told me that she didn't do what he asked and that he wants more fries in his bag, since it looked like she didn't put enough in, which she put plenty in. He just didn't get his way. Once again, just wanting to leave after I'm done with him, I just oblige and go back. My coworker who I'm going to call E calls back and says that I shouldn't let him do that. I then called back saying that we've been letting him control us for months, and it's not my problem to handle a manager's problem if he has issues. My night manager hears this and sees it's the guy at the window. They then groan and they ask me what the issue is with him this time. I explained to her the story and she went up to him and told him that it makes no difference what she does. He's getting his order fresh every single time by the people he wants to make his order, so to just suck it up and take the bag. She hands him the bag and then storms in the back to finish her inventory. The guy then pokes his arm and head in the window and tries to get one of the other coworkers to remake his order. Coworker and I both said that we're not going to do that since there was nothing even wrong with his food. Well, he doesn't like this, and he actually throws his bag of food inside the store and spills it all over the floor. He sees this and absolutely loses it. She runs over to the window that he's still in and then screams at him how he can't disrespect us like this, and that we for sure won't be remaking his order now, but we'll give him his money back. He then screams at her, and they actually go at it for a few minutes. I call up the night manager, and she runs up to also scream at him. As he gives the guy back his money, he actually grabs her arm and then yanks her almost through the window. Now, because of the pandemic, we have these plastic dividers at the top of where the customer would be speaking to. So if that wasn't there, she would have went straight through the window. Now everyone is screaming at this guy to get the hell out of there and that we're calling the cops as he just assaulted a minor. Earlier that week, he had racial slurs screamed at her by a bunch of rednecks because she was black. I felt really bad for her dealing with two big issues that happened in such a short period of time. She broke out of his grasp and ran to the back. The guy didn't even leave. In his crazy, twisted mind, he thought he was in the right here. He was running in circles outside of our walk-up area and was actually screaming to himself about E and how he's gonna set the cops on us. He tries banging on the windows to further get our attention, but we just ignored him. 4 cop cars drove in, blocking the entrance and the exit of the drive-thru so that no one can come in or leave. They talked to him and the guy just isn't grasping that he attacked a minor and he's crazy. The owner of the company sends in the security footage of just what happened to the cops, and we set the guy on trespassing. The guy actually had to be escorted off the property because he wouldn't leave. He thankfully hasn't come in since that day, but we still see him riding around the road next to our place, and he gives us menacing looks every time he passes by, not once breaking eye contact. He really wasn't right in the head. The dead stares he would give us through the windows, the emotionless way he would speak to us, how picky he was with everything, and how quick he snapped and resorted to violence. It was insane. Very fortunately, E didn't get any injuries from the incident and was only shaken up, but she did quit a few weeks later, and I can't really blame her. I feel really bad for her. No one should ever have to deal with being assaulted by customers or having racial slurs spewed at them. She was way too young to have to deal with that.
Okay, so a few years back, me and my girlfriend decided to get out of the city for a few days by renting an Airbnb. We spent a while looking at a bunch of different places, then finally settled in this place on a farm about 2 hours drive outside of the city. It was this little guest house on a farm, just across from the main house where the owners must have lived. We talked a little via email after actually paying for the place. Just little things like if we wanted some wine or some coffee left for our arrival. They were really friendly like that. Then just a few days before we were due to drive out there, they suddenly stopped replying to our emails. It was a little worrying, but not hugely so. I mean, we paid our fees and stuff, so we were definitely entitled to rent the little guest house for the week that we paid for. Besides, we figured that they were just busy or something and would get back to us as soon as they could. They told us in one email that the keys to the place would be in a lockbox that was attached to the place's porch, and that they'd email us the code on either the day before we arrived or the day of our arrival for security reasons. But then, like I said, they seemed to just go totally dark just a few days before, and they ended up not emailing us any kind of code. We were kind of annoyed, as anyone might be, and as we'd already paid our money and all that. I know we probably should have just canceled the trip and got a refund from Airbnb, but we really liked the idea of staying out on this farm place, as it would make the perfect little break from our busy urban lives. So we decided to just roll the dice, drive out there and get the code to the lockbox by knocking at the actual farmhouse instead of relying on email and stuff. The place was relatively easy to find, and both the farmhouse and the little guest house looked awesome. There was just one problem. The door to the main house was wide open, and there was a trail of clothes and household items leading up to a spot that looked like a truck or car had once sat. As you can guess, we could instantly tell that something wasn't right, as it looked like whoever had lived there had left in a hurry for some reason. Just to be sure, we walked up to the door, knocked on it, even thought it was open and called out, "Hello?" and stuff like that. We didn't get any reply, so there was definitely no one home, and we didn't actually have any of their numbers, so there was no getting in touch with them to find out where they'd gone or when they'd be back. Not that we actually thought that they were coming back anytime soon. The trail of stuff gave us a pretty good idea that no one would want to be returning at all. And the only real questions we were faced with was, why the hell did the family leave in such a hurry? And what exactly scared them so bad that they'd want to leave so fast? We didn't exactly stick around for very long. The bad vibes were seriously heavy in the air, and my girlfriend was begging me to get us out of there from almost the moment we got out of the car. But in the time we were there, we didn't see any blood or anything like that. No bullet holes either. Nothing to indicate what had happened to make people want to run away. We made sure to call the cops on the way back into the city just to let them know that something had happened if they didn't know already. Getting our money back from Airbnb was actually much easier than we figured, too. I guess they couldn't get in touch with the family either, and since it was still the day that we were due to check in, the money was still in digital limbo or whatever system they used to get us the money pretty quickly. I always wondered about what happened to the family, though. We didn't end up getting any real answers about it, other than the fact that we got our money back pretty quickly, which I'm guessing meant that they didn't contest the refund with Airbnb. We've rented Airbnb since then too, with none of that same creepiness being repeated. So while I definitely recommend using the company, I suppose you just don't know what you're walking into until you're actually there.
I was so excited to be getting back to the cabin with my cousins. It had been a few years since I had been able to join them on their weekend hunting trips, but finally, our schedules lined up and my parents let me go with them. It was just me, my two cousins, and their dad, my uncle. We made it to the cabin and began to unpack. The boys and I couldn't wait to get outside and run around the woods for a little while before it got dark. So, that's exactly what we did. We dropped our stuff off and immediately ran outside. We were out there for about 2 hours before my uncle called us in for dinner. When we got inside, he seemed a bit weird, but I didn't think anything of it. I just sat down and got ready for some dinner. That was when my uncle asked my older cousin if he remembered leaving the door open or anything like that. He seemed to think that a squirrel or some sort of animal had gotten in and had been rummaging through whatever they had left there. My cousin said no, and that was the end of that conversation. We didn't speak another word about it. We just enjoyed our pasta and talked about our plans for the next day. All through the meal, though, I couldn't help but shake the feeling like something was looking at us. Again, I just brushed it off like it was nothing and finished eating. After a few hours, it was time for bed. My cousins and I got to stay in the living room of the cabin, on the pull-out couch and the reclining chair, while my uncle slept in the room that was in the back of the cabin. It took a while because we didn't have a TV, but we eventually fell asleep. However, about an hour after finally passing out, I woke up to my younger cousin shaking me. When I asked him what he needed, he didn't move, but I noticed his eyes were locked onto the window. When I looked, I couldn't help but scream. On the other side of the window, I could see a full-grown man looking in at us. I yelled so loud that I startled everyone in the cabin awake. My older cousin and my uncle. It was so loud that even the man outside the window seemed shocked. My uncle came running out to ask me what happened. We explained everything, and without a second question, my uncle grabbed his cell phone and called the local police. They said they would be at the cabin in about 10 minutes. So until then, we all went into my uncle's room where he had his hunting rifle. And that was where we waited until the police arrived. After about 20 minutes of searching the woods, they found a man who had been hiding out in the bushes about a mile away. When they found him, the police said that he had a knife on him that looked like a kitchen knife. It was one of the ones from the cabin. To this day, the only conclusion that we could come up with is that the man had been staying in the cabin without my uncle knowing, and when we showed up, he had to leave, but he left prepared to come back and take the cabin by force. I'm thankful every day that my little cousin managed to see the man before anything bad could have happened.
Around 3 years ago, I did deliveries for my dad's pizza business to make extra money for a car I wanted. I had just turned 17 and would do several deliveries for my dad whenever I could. I hated the idea of running the register or doing dishes, so my dad let me do deliveries instead. Realistically speaking, I'd work maybe 15 hours a week to help with my dad, and being a small business, we'd maybe get about 4 or 5 deliveries a day. If we didn't get deliveries that day, I'd always help my dad with cooking whenever he needed it. One night before closing, I had been sweeping the floor when my dad asks me if I could do one last delivery. I was tired, but knowing how hard my dad worked and how badly I wanted that car, I agreed. The customer who had ordered was located on the opposite side of town, which meant it would be a longer drive. I put the order into the back of the car, a single large pie, and got on the road. My GPS led me to the more rural side of town, the type of place where you would commonly see run-down homes and stuff like that. I had already been skeptical of this part of town, but realized it was another tip at the end of the day. I arrived to the house and I immediately noticed the red flags. Not a single light was on inside, and there were no cars in the driveway. A chill ran down my spine as I saw this, as I had never seen anything more sketchy. However, I always knew that you had to do things in life you didn't want to do, so I bit my lip and walked up to the house. The doorbell was completely damaged, so I knocked. Silence filled the air until I very faintly heard footsteps approaching the door before it opened. Standing at the door was an older-looking man, maybe in his 50s, giving me a friendly smile. This made me a bit more relieved now that I felt greeted, but was still hesitant. He politely asked if I was the pizza guy, to which I replied with a yes and handed him his food. For whatever reason, I asked him why all of the lights were off in his house. There was a short pause before he finally said it was because the power went out in his neighborhood. However, that's when I noticed that the rest of the homes had at least one light on, so I knew this was a lie. Not wanting to pry and too tired to care, I tell him to have a good night and went on my way. He then stops me and tells me he wanted to give me something special for being such a good person. This was weird, but I walked over to him and he then tells me to follow him inside. It was at this point where something told me to not do it and to get back in the car. I simply just stood by the door while he insisted I come inside. Now this is the part where things would have taken a terrible turn. As I was standing by the door frame, I could very faintly see by the stairs someone wearing what appeared to be a white mask. The man saw the look on my face and must have caught on to my suspicions. At that point, I run back to the car and drive the hell out of there, not looking back. I take a look in my rearview mirror, and thankfully nobody was following me as I left. All the while, I'm hyperventilating while on the phone with my dad, telling him everything. He had told me that he'd be on the phone with the police and to come straight home. Long story short, I was questioned by the police when they asked me to name the address. As it turns out, that house had been vacant for years as nobody ever lived there. Needless to say, police still went to that house, but like in most situations like this, whoever was there was gone. I still work for my dad's business, but we made a new rule where we wouldn't accept deliveries past a certain time. It's been a few years now, and nothing has happened since. This incident still comes back to me once in a while, and makes me think about what would have happened had I not seen the man in the mask.
So a few days after my 19th birthday, a few of my buddies and I are rolling around town in one of our cars, passing bottles and generally getting up to no good. We find a spot to park up, have a few smokes and blast some music, hanging out and just messing around until long after the sunset. Eventually, once we get hungry enough, we decided to drive over to Burger King to get a bite to eat. Now, I'm pretty lit by that point, and I've been lying if I said I wasn't generally being a complete jerk here, but here goes. So the Burger King drive-thru is closed for some reason, so we park the car up, get out, and head into the restaurant. And at the head of this huge line was this giant ham beast who was in the middle of waving her arm flab around, making some animated complaint about her order. My drunk buddies and I proceeded to watch this ham beast making an absolute idiot out of herself for like 10 minutes straight, holding up the entire line until eventually she steps to the side to wait for her corrected order or whatever. Either way, the line starts to move again. Everyone is super livid at this hog lady for holding up the line, and I could tell the workers behind the counter were less than pleased with her too. So by the time I get to the front to give my order, I'm feeling all cocky and righteous, and for some reason I had it in my head that if I made the workers laugh by roasting the hog lady, I'd get like a free meal out of it or something. So I say something to the effect of, "May I apologize on behalf of humanity for the irate snuffling of my heavy friend here." No one laughs. They all just look pretty shocked, looking back and forth between the ham beast and myself, waiting for the aftermath. She turns red in the face, and I expect her to explode on me. I'm ready for the black eye or whatever. It was worth it, just to hear my buddies cracking up behind me. But she didn't flip her lid. She didn't say a word. She just sort of stood there, steaming mad until the guy behind the counter appeared with her amended food order. Then she just sits down and starts eating her food. We get our food and sit down on the opposite side of the restaurant, and all the while my buddies are like, "Come on, man, you burned her, jeez, dude." But I'm looking over at her, because the ham beast is on her phone, just talking all quiet, but every so often she shoots us a little bit of a look with this big smug grin on her fat face. I don't know what I was expecting to happen, but why I thought I'd get away with it, I have no idea. Because the moment we walked out of that restaurant, we just hear from behind us, "There he is. That one, right there." I look around, and she's pointing at me, the same smug grin on her face. Then, when I turn back, there's a gun in my face. I honestly can't remember what the dude was screaming at me, only that he was, but I know it was her husband. It's weird the little details you notice when something like that happens to you. I distinctly remember seeing the dude's wedding ring on a finger that was wrapped around the handle of the pistol. I'm not a gun guy, but that thing was an incredibly big pistol, like huge. And all I did was sort of zone out and look down the barrel for a few moments with this guy's screams ringing in my ears. It was only when he pushed it to my forehead that reality came back to me and hit me like a ton of bricks. I just remember shaking so hard that when the guy told me to get down on my knees, I could barely react. He screamed at me to get on my knees because I didn't deserve to die on my feet, and that line stuck with me even to this day. I've never been so scared in my entire life. If you notice, I haven't given my name or where this happened or when it happened. This is to give me enough anonymity to admit that just after I fell to my knees, and I mean fell to my knees, I just straight urinated my pants, which I didn't even know was really a thing. I mean, obviously I've heard about people being so scared they wet themselves, but I didn't think it could actually happen to people. But I suppose since I was full of booze and that large Coke, there was plenty in my bladder to void. and void my bladder I did. Somehow, I had found a way to make a terrible situation even worse. Not only did I think I was about to die in a parking lot, while a whole restaurant full of strangers looked on in horror, I was about to die soaked in my own urine, cowering and shaking, on my knees outside of a freaking Burger King. He starts shouting other stuff at this point too, but I can't quite remember that either. I was just waiting for the moment my light switched off, a feeling like I'd fallen asleep real fast that I'd never, ever wake up from. I remember trying to shout something myself, something about how, will someone please call the cops, or whatever, but fear is a powerful thing. I couldn't speak. I mean, it was like a nightmare come to life. One of those where you try to scream for help, but your voice just sort of dries up in your throat. The next thing I remember are my ears pricking up to the word cops being spoken by some bystander just out of my view. Then I hear the distinct voice of the ham beast repeating the word, only this time, it's not me that sounds scared, it's her. I feel the tip of the pistol leave the back of my head, and by the time I summon the courage to look around again, I see the pair of them, ham beast and gun guy, screeching out of the parking lot in some battered old sedan, followed swiftly by the blaring sirens in the distance. It was only when I was giving my statement to the cops that I noticed my buddies were gone. And not only were they completely out of sight, so was the car. So I had to be driven home to my parents' house in a freaking cop car, which clued them into the fact that I had been drinking, which to them was far more worthy of their attention to the fact I'd almost just been shot in a Burger King parking lot. They tried to ground me for like a month, but they didn't need to enforce it. I was too shaken up to leave the house for the first week entirely. Just be careful who you're talking to or trying to be funny. You never know who's psycho enough to put a gun to your head.
I worked as a delivery